I'm Mo Blackwell, the host of the upcoming podcast Targeted: True Crime Domestic Violence. We'll investigate one case of family violence each season using academic research to help us better interpret the events so that we can become better advocates. Now, if you've experienced abuse, I want you to know that you are not just a victim, you have been targeted. It's not bad luck. It's not poor choices. It's that someone decided to abuse you. And you are not alone. In the United States, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner. About 5 children die every day from child abuse. 5 children die every day in the United States from child abuse. And on October 13th, 1976, 4-year-old Melisha Gibson was one of those children who was killed. Join me for Season 1 as we spotlight the murder of little Melisha and how her tortuous death in 1976 led to changes in social service departments around the United States. Now, there are some crimes that are so heinous that they seem to immediately enter the consciousness of a nation, and people band together to denounce the guilty and seek justice in avenues other than just courts of law. And 4-year-old Melisha Gibson's death in Southeast Tennessee was one of these. I was around 10 years old, and I lived in California, which is the other side of the country from Tennessee, and even I remember hearing of her death at the hands of her stepfather and mother. Oh, the news programs were full of condemnation of the parents and a call for overhauling the children's services at the time. And it had a big impact on me, so much so that I remember it vividly today. Now, many of you may not be familiar with this sweet little girl's story. Melisha Gibson was 4 years old in 1976. She lived in a tiny house with her mother, her 2 sisters, 2 brothers, and her stepfather. Missy, as her family called her, had only recently moved back to live with her parents after being in foster care for nearly 3 years. She was in foster care because her mom and her stepdad were in prison for having abused her as an infant. Now, there were many warning signs that home was a dangerous place for her, and even her pediatrician recommended to the court that she should not live with her parents. But the doctor was ignored. And on the night of October 11th, 1976, Melisha was restless, and she wet the bed. According to statements both the parents gave, her stepfather, Ronnie Maddox, forced her to lie on the floor without covers in her urine-soaked pajamas. In the morning, October 12th, according to his wife, Wanda Gibson Maddox, who is Missy's mom, he decided that, quote, "I'm going to get the stiffness and laziness out of her," unquote, and required her to march around the house, hitting her every time she passed him. Ronnie Maddox admitted that when she slowed down, he had hit her with a stick, and she would continue to walk, crying. When Missy was thirsty, he gave her hot sauce to drink and proceeded to drink water himself while she watched. Later, the sheriff testified that during the abuse, Melisha would say, "Daddy, I learned my lesson. Please don't hit me." But Ronnie Maddox continued all the same. After a full day of abuse, everyone was allowed to go to bed finally. And when they woke up, October 13th, Missy could not be woken up. She had died during the night. Both parents were arrested, tried in a joint trial, convicted of second-degree murder, sentenced to 99 years plus 1 day, and each died in prison. I think this case impacted me so much because hearing of Melisha's experiences encouraged me to process my own relationship with my dad. And even though I didn't like him at times, I was fully aware that he would not treat me that way. I was too young, though, to be cognizant of the major policy changes that many states instituted in human services departments in the years following Melisha's death. But these changes were significant. Many regulations in social services that we have today were a direct response to protect children from this kind of predictable harm. Melisha's death was tragic, but it propelled change, thus potentially saving many children who benefited from these new policies. When I moved near Cleveland, Tennessee as an adult, I was surprised to discover that this was the little city where Melisha died, and that many in the town were still processing what had happened. There was still hurt, blame, remonstrations, as well as lingering questions. It is still commonplace for people to spew hate publicly towards the parents, ranting that they should have had to endure the same fate as little Missy, rather than dying natural deaths in prison after decades of incarceration. All of this started me thinking about whether there are still lessons to be learned from little Melisha's death. What did happen during her last days on Earth? How was her death investigated? And what happened during her parents' trial? As a college professor, I'm interested to apply the current domestic and family violence research that we have today as a lens to better understand the events of 1976. And in doing so, maybe we can better understand what's happening around us now. As I've researched the tragedy, one of the things that has been very clear is how little we understood domestic violence in the 1970s, and how Melisha's death encompasses more issues than we usually discuss when we're talking about her death. So yes, there's more, so much more that we can learn from Melisha Gibson's tragedy. Her stepfather targeted her for abuse so severe that she died. But she wasn't the only target in the family. Join me this season as we investigate her life, her death, her parents' trial, and the social service policies that changed. Now, please recognize that if you have not lived through being a target of domestic violence, you may not understand the reactions of those who have. Now, that lack of comprehension is normal, and it's why researchers focus on this area, because from a common sense perspective, we don't get the reaction of targets. But if we listen to their stories and we begin to understand more and identify patterns, we can understand more. Hopefully this knowledge will enable us to help friends and family who are involved in abusive relationships. Follow us on Twitter at Targeted Podcast and join our Facebook group. Just search for Targeted Podcast and request to join. I'm Mo Blackwell, and you're listening to Targeted: True Crime, Domestic Violence.